There's a photograph taken at 8:15 in the morning, March 18th, 1990. In the photo, a young Rand sits in the basement of a museum in Boston. He's 23 years old. His name is Rick. He's wearing a security guard uniform, but his wrists are wrapped in duct tape. His ankles, too. The tape is wrapped around his head, over and over, from his forehead to his chin, covering his ears, covering part of his face. He had been there for 6.5 hours, alone, in the dark, left there by two men he let in through the front door. And while Rick sat in that basement, those two men walked through one of the most prestigious art museums in America. They had 81 minutes. They used every second. When they walked out at 2:45 in the morning, they carried 13 works of art with them, paintings by Rembrandt,
Vermeer, Degas, Manet, worth around $500 million. To understand what happened that night, you first need to understand the museum, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and why what was stolen can never truly be replaced. Isabella Stewart Gardner was a wealthy Boston art collector, brilliant, eccentric, completely obsessed with art. The largest art theft in history. They were never caught. The paintings were never found. And Rick, the man in that photograph, spent the rest of his life trying to answer one question. Did he let them in by accident, or did he let them in on purpose? This is the story of one night shift that changed everything.
She spent her life collecting paintings, ancient artifacts, rare tapestries, masterpieces from around the world. In 1903, she opened her private collection to the public inside a beautiful Venetian-style palace in Boston. But there was one strange rule. Before Isabella died in 1924, she wrote something into her will. Nothing in the museum could ever be changed. Nothing could be moved, nothing replaced, nothing rearranged. Everything had to remain exactly where she left it, forever. The museum itself became a frozen moment in time. By 1990, the Gardner Museum was famous, beloved, and dangerously underprotected. The security system was weak. There were motion detectors, but they didn't alert police directly. The guards were expected to check things themselves. The cameras recorded onto VHS tapes, and overnight, the entire museum was protected by only 2 guards. Just 2. In 1988, a security consultant warned the museum about these problems. The museum reviewed the recommendations, but they decided the upgrades cost too much, so nothing changed. And on the night of March 17, 1990, St. Patrick's Day, 2 guards arrived for the overnight shift. One was Randy Hestond, quiet, reliable. The other was Rick Abath. Rick was 23, a former art student, a musician, part of the underground creative scene. He liked rock music, he loved art, and he had worked the midnight shift for months. He knew the museum, he knew the rules, especially one rule. If someone rang the bell after hours, you do not open the door. You call the police. You do not let anyone inside. That night, Rick started his shift at midnight. 61 hours later, he would still be answering questions about what happened at 1:24 in the morning. The beginning of the shift felt normal. Rick did his patrols, checked the galleries, logged the motion sensor activity, sat at the security desk, waited. At some point before 1 a.m., Rick made a strange decision. He entered the Blue Room, a gallery that wasn't part of his normal route. The motion sensors recorded it.
He stayed briefly, then left. Years later, investigators became obsessed with this moment. Because one of the stolen paintings, a Manet painting, would later disappear from that same room, and somehow the thieves never triggered the motion sensors there. But at 1:24 a.m., none of that had happened yet. At 1:24, the buzzer rang. Rick looked at the security monitor. 2 men stood outside, both wearing police uniforms. One leaned toward the intercom. "Boston Police, we got a report of a disturbance on the premises." Rick looked at the monitor, looked at the uniforms, thought about the rules, and then he opened the door. Later, he said they looked like real police officers, and when police tell you to open a door, you open it. What happened next took less than a minute. The moment the thieves stepped inside, one of them shoved Rick against the wall. "This is a robbery. Don't do anything stupid." Rick was handcuffed. The second guard was called over. He was restrained too. Within minutes, both men were tied up in the basement, wrists bound, ankles wrapped in duct tape, tape around their heads, around their ears, over part of their faces. And then the footsteps went upstairs, and the museum went quiet. For the next 81 minutes, the 2 thieves walked through the museum with complete control. They knew exactly what they wanted. They cut priceless paintings from their frames, a Rembrandt, another Rembrandt, a Vermeer, Degas sketches, a Manet portrait, 13 pieces in total. At one point, one of the thieves returned to the basement. He looked at Rick and said, "You're going to be on the news tomorrow." Then he walked back upstairs. At 2:45 a.m., the thieves left. They loaded the artwork into a waiting car and disappeared into the Boston night. Rick and Randy stayed tied up in the basement for more than 5 hours. At 8 that morning, the next shift arrived. The front door was slightly open. Nobody answered. Police were called. Real police this time. When they found Rick, the duct tape had been around his head for over 6 hours. Upstairs, the museum walls were empty. And decades later, those empty frames are still hanging there.